Bitcoin is pumping. Donald Trump makes new statements about tariffs, and that lifts the markets upwards. Let's take a look at what's going on. Additionally, we see Michael Saylor, who has now accumulated over 500,000 Bitcoin, thus making history. Additionally, we have an exciting bet from Arthur Hayes, who now suggests that the probability of a breakout is significantly higher than that of a pullback. So, the next price target here is 110,000 US dollars. And then we have a very, very intriguing assessment from Florian Homm, a former hedge fund manager, who talks about a hidden cause of inflation that very, very few people have on their radar, but which could mean massive problems for Germany and Europe. But let's start here with Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor has become increasingly controversial. At the beginning, everyone somehow celebrated it. But by now, he has accumulated such a large Bitcoin power and so many Bitcoins that there are more and more critics. In any case, we now see here that the company strategy has added more. They bought 6,911 Bitcoins for 584.1 million US dollars. In total, they now have over 500,000 Bitcoins, specifically 506,137 Bitcoins, which is just crazy. And in this whole story, there are still purchases of 711 million through the new preferred shares, STRF. There is definitely more to come. Michael Saylor probably really wants to reach 1 million next. And yes, on one hand, it pumps the Bitcoin price up, but on the other hand, it's an increasing concentration of power here at MicroStrategy. I'm relatively neutral here. I don't think the whole thing is going to explode, but I also don't find it ultra bullish or anything, or super cool, or anything like that. Now many people have said, okay, the Bitcoin price is currently pumping because MicroStrategy has bought Bitcoin again. No, the Bitcoin purchases were already made in the last few days. This is just the announcement now. And whenever MicroStrategy makes the announcement, the Bitcoin purchases have already happened in the last few days, and what we see now is that we had a massive statement from Donald Trump after which the Bitcoin price went up. The Bitcoin price had already gone up a bit before, but after this statement, the Bitcoin price went up even further. And the whole thing is related to tariffs again. And the funny thing is, I had already announced this. I said in a previous video, probably 3 or 4 days ago, that you should watch out for the 2nd April. You have to look, because that's when the new tariffs come into effect. And if it becomes clear that Donald Trump was just bluffing, then there will be a pump upwards. And now we see that it becomes clear that Donald Trump was just bluffing, but not on the 2nd of April. Rather, he has already revealed the bluff earlier. According to the Kobasi letter, the Wall Street Journal reports that it is no longer expected that President Trump will introduce sector-specific tariffs on the 2nd April. Introduces sector-specific tariffs. And the S&P 500 has increased by 75,000 points. Bitcoin has clearly risen as well. The official statement from the White House says that the White House is narrowing its approach on the tariffs that are supposed to take effect on the 2nd of April and is expected to forego a number of sector-specific tariffs while simultaneously imposing counter-tariffs on a targeted group of countries that make up the majority of foreign trade with the USA. These sector-specific tariffs are now expected not to be announced on the 2nd April, a government official said. So, here we have an official confirmation that this will not happen. And I clearly said back then, hey, if on the 2nd of April, the market realizes that Donald Trump was just bluffing here and used the tariffs only as a bargaining chip. That's exactly what I said. He uses the tariffs as leverage, but will probably find some interim deal or something like that later. Then the market will potentially become more risk tolerant again. Then the market will potentially start investing money again and potentially take on more risk here. Switch to a risk on sentiment. I wouldn't say yet that we are already in a risk on sentiment, but if this continues, and it becomes increasingly clear that Donald Trump was bluffing and the tariffs won't be as bad, then it could also be that the market regains confidence and capital flows back into the market. We need to keep monitoring this. Of course, it could also happen at any time that Donald Trump decides to demand higher tariffs again or make other tariff claims or something like that. The market will crash again. We always see that when Donald Trump does something positive regarding tariffs, the market goes up. If it's something negative, the market goes down. So we need to keep monitoring. And then we had a super interesting assessment from market analyst Arthur Hayes. He writes here, I bet Bitcoin will reach 110,000 before it retests 76,500. So he now assumes that we will see a bullish breakout. He's not saying it will happen 100%, but the probability is significantly higher. And he's also making a bet on the whole thing here. So I don't think there's money involved, but he's simply saying that it's a bet that Bitcoin is more likely to break out rather than crash down again. And then you might wonder, okay, how does he come to this conclusion? He says here, the Fed is switching from QT to QE for government bonds. So that's very, very important. Now the QT programs, quantitative tightening, are coming to an end. That means it's decreasing. Money is being withdrawn from the market. And this could then become a smooth transition to QE. I mean, we're still a bit away from QE, where central banks also start buying bonds again, and thus pump money back into the market. But Arthur Hayes already assumes that QE programs will come. And that was once the most bullish thing that could ever happen for Bitcoin. So, Arthur Hayes is also quite sure that we will see an all-time high this year. And next, we have that tariffs play no role, that they cause temporary inflation. Jay Powell here, the president of the Federal Reserve, told me that. I don't know if he really said that to him. That's probably more of a joke here. So, Yes, Jay Powell, or what does the joke mean? Jay Powell did say in his speech that tariffs are not so relevant in the long term, but rather only relevant in the short term. But hey, it looks at the long term here. He's referring to Jerome Powell, and making a bit of a joke about Jerome Powell here. I don't know if he really means it seriously, probably half serious or something like that. And then he says here, I will elaborate on this in my next essay. And now he makes a very, very important remark down here. And now he addresses it and says, hey, when we reach 110,000 US dollars, it's time for a massive, explosive breakout upwards. And we won't look back until 250,000 US dollars. That means he's assuming now, okay, in the short term, the tariffs don't matter at first. In the medium and short term, however, the new movements in the money supply are significant here. Very, very important. And according to Arthur Hayes, this would also mean that we would drift back into a risk-on sentiment. This might take another 1 or 2 months. Then we will next catch up to 110,000 US dollars. And once we have reached 110,000 US dollars, the bull run will be in full swing. We go from 110,000 US dollars to more than double up to 250,000 US dollars. And this doesn't happen in 10 years, but it all happens this year. And we have experienced this so often in the past when Bitcoin gains momentum, especially when Bitcoin gains momentum due to the liquidity flowing into the market and the risk-on sentiment that we have repeatedly seen in recent years. We always have these cycles, meaning we sometimes have a risk-off sentiment, then a risk-on sentiment again, risk-off, risk-on. And whenever we have seen the risk-on sentiment, it was usually in the second, 2.5 to third year after the Bitcoin halving. So not the year of the Bitcoin halving, but the year after, where it then went up massively. And this has always matched very, very well with the liquidity. And then we had the risk-on mode, and the entire market just pumped upwards. Of course, risky assets also went up, tech stocks and so on. And Bitcoin has always benefited from this upswing. And that's why Arthur Hayes is so extremely bullish here. But feel free to let me know in the comments whether you think this is an accurate assessment or if it's an exaggeration. In any case, we now have a very, very exciting assessment from Florian Homm, former hedge fund manager, former billionaire. Or I don't know if he's still a billionaire, no idea. In any case, Florian Homm is often seen as controversial. He sometimes has controversial takes, and he actually made a statement here that I interpreted in the form, not really heard from other people, of course, somewhat in a preliminary way. And sure, it makes sense what he's saying here, somehow. And he really has some very, very impressive numbers to present. We're going to take a look at that right now. I'm not 100% sure if the numbers are actually that large, but if it's at least accurate in tendency, even. If it's 20-30% less, it would still be an absolute shocker. And it would mean that Germany is massively in trouble and facing massive problems. And the whole thing is extremely inflationary for the Eurozone. And anyone who doesn't have Bitcoin here has drawn the short straw. You can see it here. This is about the 1 trillion euros being burned here. Germany's dead chaos here. And now listen in.
And now I'm going to get straight to the real inflation problem, because I've talked about stagnation, waste, and of course touched on inflation as well. This is our absolutely broken, dilapidated healthcare system. Anyone who hasn't noticed that their private health insurance has gone up by up to 30% and sees how much even the statutory insurance is rising hasn't really understood the real inflation problem yet. I'm grateful to Philip Haas, who had Prof. Dr. Deeker and Prof. Dr. Matisik in the interview. The Paul Ehrlich Institute is now informed that there are 1 million vaccine injuries. Okay, with 83 million people, where is the fucking problem? This will naturally drive up healthcare costs. But we researched a bit deeper with about 20,000 sources, analyzed over 2,000 studies from absolute, non-conspiracy-oriented sources. We left out all the others. We wrote 1,000 pages of text on it, published graphics, and I gave 6 webinars on the topic. What's the real thing? What's going on? Why is Germany really screwed? Why are we really on the decline? Because 4 million to 8 million Germans are more or less harmed by the vaccinations. A bit of lol. COVID, I also say. And of course, also due to the lockdowns. And we have something really messed up at the moment. We have chronicity. So we have chronic. Actually, chronicity isn't quite right. We have a chronic health burden. It's simply not getting better. This was initially seen in the excess mortality, but now it's visible in the healthcare costs and these data, about which the mainstream doesn't write at all. And what about these trillions? That's all nonsense, or as Ackermann, former German bank chief, said, it's not peanuts. He sees it in the interest rates. When the stock market professionals really start to understand that we have a delta, a change of 4 trillion, because that was the savings potential of the last 6-7 years. Not done, 1 trillion. We have wasted 1 trillion. We are currently wasting 1 trillion, and we are failing again to save the potential of 1 trillion for the next 5-6 years. What is obvious is, then that is more than the entire German economic output. The German economic journey is us. 3.83 trillion. It is, believe it or not, 45,000 euros per resident. The damned, well not damned, but the wealth, according to Credit Suisse, Statista, OECD. The average wealth in Germany is 61,000 euros. Do you get a sense of the scale? And the reality is that such mismanagement, such misallocation of capital always has consequences. You don't see them immediately, but it is indeed. The change from a triple E rating to a double E rating, to an E rating, to a borderline drunk, until you reach Argentine conditions. The French are doing it even better than we are.
So, you're clearly stating that the healthcare costs will explode. And as I said, I'm not sure if the numbers are accurate, but if it at least tends in that direction, then this could lead to a massive inflationary surge. And in addition, we also have all the debt packages. And here we can already see that bond yields are going up. And here, Mr. Homm is also talking about the potential for Germany to become a jump bond. I mean, it's a long way to get there. One has to honestly admit that. Sure, it's always a bit exaggerated. I also sometimes exaggerate statements. That's just what you do on YouTube. You want to trigger people in, so on. But the trends are always accurate. The trends are there, suggesting that Germany might not be in such a good position, that the euro might not be in such a good position, that it will become more inflationary, and that Bitcoin benefits from all of this. And anyone who doesn't have Bitcoin now has lost control over their life. Anyone who is saving euros now has lost control over their life. Anyone who is still relying on paper money in general has lost control over their life. And anyone who still doesn't realize that we are on the brink of a turning point has also lost control over their life. People, get involved with what's happening in the background here. It's massive. You can either be the bizarre professor, or you'll wake up in 3 or 4 years. And then like here, what's his name? Klausy Schwab. Klausy. When he says, yeah, I just don't want to own anything anymore and be happy. It could also be that you wake up to reality then. That's why you should get involved with what's currently happening here. Bitcoin is a solution. There are several other solutions. You can also vote with your feet by immigrating. There are so many things you can do. You can also create change where you currently are. You can be the change you want to see in the world. That's actually always the best. So, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link below for you. 21 Bitcoin. How you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. There are savings plans here. There are limit orders here. There are auto wallet transfers. There are so many great features here. Definitely check it out. With the code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, we'll see each other. Peace out.